What's up, social? Who's excited to be here tonight? Come on, make some noise. I see you. Hey, is anybody else tired of this weather? I mean, very Arkansas of it, just back and forth and back and forth. I mean, if you're new to Arkansas, which, hey, we're in Northwest Arkansas, y'all are young adults. We know there's a lot of people in and out of this place all the time. So this might be your first early spring in here in Arkansas, and just say welcome. The weather reflects that so well, just off and on and off and on, and it's feeling warm, and now it's been cold today, and it's gonna be apparently really beautiful and warm this weekend. Can't wait for that. Easter warm weather, but really this weather back and forth reminds me of earlier this year, at the very beginning, actually January 1st, I got the opportunity to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, which is in Tanzania, Africa. And you might think that Africa is going to be just warm and hot. Well, not at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. It is not the case. We got a couple pictures there of some of the guys on our trip and making it to the top. You can see it's pretty frigid there at the top at 19,341 feet of elevation. Pretty cold. We camped for 8 days, and it's a great time, just a little bit long to go, without the shower. We walked about 15,644 feet in ascent, which ends up being about 44 miles in total. And here's what's crazy about just how off and on it is you start in a rainforest. I mean, there's literally monkeys everywhere. It's hot, it's humid. I mean, it's a rainforest. And then you end up, and it's freezing cold, frigid, just terribly, awfully cold at the end. And so that's such a huge just range. And I can definitely say it was one of the hardest things I've ever done physically, but maybe even more so mentally. It is definitely a mental challenge. And it's one of those kind of things when one of the highlights of the whole trip is just taking a shower at the sketchy hotel in Tanzania right at the end. And like I said, I love hiking, I love camping, maybe not that long. But I also do love a dude's trip, and the guys that I got to go with are just awesome. And those three other guys that are with me there, that's not the whole team, but those are guys, our pastors here at Cross Church. So we had to do that together, just a great time. And it made it one of the best experiences I've ever had, in a 2-week experience of my whole life. And it's one of those kind of trips, though, and I'm sure you've been on something like this before, experienced something like this, that it's really too hard to describe. People ask you about it, and you're it was just awesome. I got no words for you. But in particular, for me on this trip, I got to see a bunch of awesome things. But one of the parts that's the hardest to describe is just some moments I had that were super tangible with the Lord. That were some of those kind of moments I'm man, I don't even know how to describe what I just experienced. One of those was that the night before the descent, we were actually in this tent together, just kind of getting ready for our final climb together, and which started at midnight. So we're at 8 p.m., we're about to take a little nap, and we decided to do communion. Literally, somebody on the trip brought those little communion cups with them the whole time. And so we get to have communion, pray together, and we worshiped. And I'm telling you, it's one of those times in my life, this is a moment I'll never forget. And then the last hour of the hike, so literally we're on the way up, can't breathe very well, and so maybe it's lack of oxygen, or just the Lord, And I really felt like God really spoke to me in a clear way, not audibly, but almost just as clear. Partially about this ministry that hopefully we'll get into one day, and then also my own life. And there were just these moments that were just super, super impactful to me. And there's something about being in the wilderness on a hike that somehow just kind of heightens and just makes God's presence just more aware. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just being away from distractions, away from the noise of just kind of the day-to-day. Maybe it's just being surrounded by beautiful nature. I'm not sure what it is, but it's really always been true for me. And I can't prove this. This is not in the Bible, so don't open there to this yet. But I can't prove it, but I really think that in the wilderness, up on a mountain, God sometimes just can move extra. In a way, I can't prove this biblically, but also there's a ton of mountaintop experiences that we can see in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so tonight, we're in this series called Covenants. I'm even wearing my Cross Seminary shirt because we're going deep on this thing called the Mosaic Covenant tonight. And I want to show you just a few slides here. I have 10 examples. I'm not going to go over them all. But I want to show you, so if you're taking notes, you can maybe capture it with your phone. But I have here, so here's the first 4. I have different mountaintop experiences, okay? Like God all the time met with people and had these crazy experiences on mountaintops. And so you can see from Mount Moriah there, this is number 1, go to the next slide. You see Mount Carmel, Mount Horeb, Mount Hermon. Give it a second for the picture, go to the next slide. All the way to seeing Jesus at the Mount of Olives. So all these mountaintop experiences. Why am I talking about mountaintop experiences? Well, going into the Mosaic Covenant tonight, we're continuing the series looking at Moses having a crazy encounter with God, starting this new covenant happening here. So we're going to kind of fly through and break down these 5 parts of the covenant tonight. And if you're taking notes, here's what you need to take down is the big idea. The big idea is that the Mosaic Covenant reveals a God who delivers, who sets apart, and who demands obedience as a response to his grace. If you've been coming on Sundays here at Cross Church, this is not going to be like unfamiliar to you. We are actually in the middle of a 20-week series here at Cross Church on Exodus. I love that we're at a church that just dives deep. 20 weeks on any book is deep. On Exodus is a next level. I think we're on week like 12 or 13. And so we're going to hit like a really high level and just like, what does this mean for us looking at the book of Exodus, looking at the Mosaic Covenant, really right in step with where we're at on Sunday mornings. And if you've been coming on Sundays, you know this, that the story of Exodus isn't just history. It's like the backdrop for a covenant that's going to reshape our understanding of a lot of things, including what it means to be God's people. From the cries of Israel in Egypt to the thunderous presence of God on Mount Sinai, we're going to see a narrative of deliverance, a narrative of promise, and a narrative of expectation. And so far in this series, we've looked at the Noahic covenant and the Abrahamic covenant. So just to give a little flyover of how we got here tonight. So Abraham was promised a son, and that son was Isaac. One of his sons was Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons, one being Jacob. And that Jacob had 12 sons. And if you've been around church for a long time, you know that there's this thing called the 12 tribes of Israel. His 12 sons would be the founders of those tribes. And one of those, son number 11, was Joseph. Again, if you've been in church for a while, you might know Joseph because he's the guy that had the bright, colorful coat, got sold into slavery by his brothers, and ends up in power after a lot of crazy things. And he's in power, and he saves his whole family and the whole land during a time of famine. And what he does is he actually brings his whole family from where they are to Egypt to live with them, and he's the dude in power. So that's kind of where we see. And then years go by, Israelites multiply, so now all of a sudden this has really become their home. And there's so many of them, they become a threat to the Egyptians. They're like, why is there so many of these people here? And then a new Pharaoh comes into power, and this new Pharaoh says, man, I don't like that there's all these people. And he doesn't know who Joseph is. He doesn't know why they're important. He doesn't even know why they're there. He just sees a workforce, puts them to work. Let's make sure that they don't get too big-headed and start taking over this place. Which brings us to our first thing, our first part of the covenant, and that's the problem. So you're taking notes. What's the problem? It's that Israel is stuck in bondage. They're in bondage here, and Israel is stuck as slaves. The Israelites cry out to God as slaves in Egypt, just begging God, like, God, hear us, get us out of this mess. We don't want to be here anymore. And one of the key words to focus in on like this problem in this Mosaic covenant is the word reveal. Revealing a God that's not distant, not a God who's indifferent, but one that is deeply moved by the cry of the oppressed. In the midst of this unbearable suffering, in the midst of this slavery and this bondage, the Israelites cry out and God responds with attention and action. Look with me in Exodus 2:23 through 25. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered this covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. This is a pivotal just moment in the history of the Bible for the Israel people, but not just from their release of bondage, but it's profound in revealing this. It reveals the character of God, a God who listens, who sees, and who intervenes for the broken. That's the kind of God that we get to witness here because of what's going on here in this story. And it just kind of leads me to ask this, like, what about you? Do you feel like you're stuck in bondage? Maybe it's because of your own mistakes. Maybe it's because of the mistakes of your parents or somebody else in your life that you didn't get to choose, but all of a sudden you feel the same kind of despair that Israel's feeling here. They're just feeling stuck. I don't know if anybody can attest to feeling stuck. Stuck in a situation, or maybe even stuck in bondage to sin. And you've been like doing everything in your power to just like, I need to get rid of this sin that just like I'm tangled up in, and I'm ready to be done. Like, God, please take it away. But you just feel like for whatever reason, you just feel stuck. Well, tonight you need to hear this, is that you are heard, you are seen, and there's a God who's there for you. But really, like, who hasn't ever felt trapped by just trials in life and by messes that we just find ourselves in, or ensnared by your own choices? Maybe it's like nights just filled with like crippling anxiety. You feel like you just can't even go to sleep because you're just so anxious and you have all these thoughts just running through your mind. Or maybe your day is just overshadowed by uncertainty because you have no idea what's coming around the corner, and it's killing you because you wish you could know, and man, your life just feels like it's a mess right now. Maybe it's moments of loneliness, that word loneliness feels like your only friend, your only companion, whatever it is. Maybe you feel stuck in here, and it's in these times that we reach out, that we're hoping, we're longing for a sign that we're not walking in this wilderness alone. And the deliverance of the Israelites serves as a powerful testimony that our cries don't just get lost in the void, but we have a God who hears us, who sees us, and who's there for us every single time. He's a God who rescues and delivers, even if it's just in the middle of our trouble, and he's there for us. And what we're going to see here tonight is a shift. We're going to see a shift from like this crying to being comforted by God. God who hears cries and responds with compassion. So that leads us into the next part, and that's the plan. So what's the plan? The plan is that God chooses an unlikely leader. God chooses an unlikely leader. This is a theme that we've seen every single week so far, and we're going to continue to see all throughout the Bible, is that God's plan for the people. He sees the problem, he hears them, and he sends an unlikely leader. And so here's what's going on now in the story, is the population is still growing, so much so that Pharaoh makes it a law to kill all the boys in general. It's been almost 400 years of slavery. Again, you might know this story, but Moses is born, he's hidden, he's adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, who's raised in the palace. He ends up killing an Egyptian, running away, finds himself in the middle of nowhere to a burning bush that doesn't burn up, and God talks to him. So look at Exodus 3, chapter 3, verse 9. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you, that I have sent you when you have brought the people out of Egypt. You shall serve God on this mountain. So you see a mountaintop experience coming his way. And Moses is insecure, as many of us are, if we're just being honest. He's insecure about his leadership. He's insecure about his calling. He's like, I'm not qualified, God, but God provides Moses everything he needs. And again, if you're coming here on Sundays, we just hit the 9th plague, and the 10th plague is this Sunday. And God sends these 10 plagues. They get out of Egypt. They leave. The Pharaoh ends up changing his mind, chasing them down. Classic story of the Red Sea parts. They run through. Water collapses on the Egyptians, just wiping them out. And so that's where we bring ourselves into here. And then what happens is in Exodus chapter 19 through 24 is the Israelites are going in the wilderness, trudging along, and God calls them here to this mountain, Mount Sinai, known as the Mountain of God. And I don't know about you, but I know that sometimes I can get insecure too. And this might be a shocker for you that me, and I know Zach and Luke and Ben and anybody else who ever takes this stage, we all can have moments of insecurity leading at any kind of level, but definitely bringing the word of God. So I can speak for them, I can speak for myself, I can speak for a lot of people. I can speak for Moses that when God calls you to something, it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have the most security of all time. But here's what's so powerful is that he uses people who aren't the strongest. He uses people who aren't the smartest. He uses anybody. And he wants to use you. And I'm so encouraged by 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10, that it's one of my favorite passages of Scripture. It says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, I am strong. I mean, that's Paul talking. If Paul can say that, hey, I'm in good company tonight. God chooses to use the weak. He uses the humble. And God uses people just like Moses. That was his plan. Use a guy who he thought he couldn't even talk well. He uses this guy for his plan. Which leads us next to the next part, is to the promise. A people set apart for God's glory. A people set apart for his glory is what he's promising here. And at the heart of God's interaction with his people, here's what it is he's saying, hey, I want a deep and personal relationship and commitment through this thing called a bilateral covenant. Again, we're going seminary level here tonight. And if you've been listening the past couple weeks, we've talked about these kind of different covenants. But a bilateral covenant means a mutual agreement or promise between two parties where both parties are obligated to fulfill certain responsibilities. So he's going to bring us into this bilateral covenant where both parties have something that they have to do to bring to the table. And here's how we got to this point is, again, now the people arrive at the mountain. God says, hey, I'm about to speak to you guys, so come on in. During this time, God instructs Moses to consecrate the people and prepare them for the appearance. So that they have to clean their clothes. They have to abstain from some different activities just for purity and for reverence. And on the third day, it gets crazy, way crazier than my mountaintop experience. That was really windy. But what happened here was there was thunder, there's lightning, there's a thick cloud that covers the mountain. A sound of trumpet blasts grow louder and louder. Can you imagine just how, talk about anxiety. That'd be crazy. Then Moses leads the people out of the camp to meet God at the foot of the mountain. And then so this dramatic display of this presence, God speaks to the people and lays out the terms of the covenant. So look with me in Exodus chapter 19, verse 5 through 8 to see this. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all the words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Sounds like they're in, right? And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. So this was about establishing a relationship with the people and with God coming together, and it all hinged on Israel's obedience to God, right? You seeing this? And through the details just kind of laid out here in those 3 verses, God sets forth the terms of the covenant. If the Israelites follow God and preserve the sanctity of the covenant, they're going to get all these things from the Lord. And this isn't just like a blueprint, like a to-do list, hey, you got to do these things. It was God's strategy of creating this community, this new relationship with these people. I want you to think about maybe a contract or agreement, and maybe think about a new job offer. What is it? It's a bilateral covenant. You're saying, hey, I'm going to work 40 hours. I'm going to clock in 40 hours this week. And you better pay me for 40 hours of work. Now, there'd be problems at your work, right? If you only clocked in 20 hours, but they paid you 40. There'd be problems on your side if you worked 40 and got paid for 20, right? We see this mutual commitment to each other to do what you say you're going to do. That's the key, is doing what you say you're going to do, and it elevates trust, it builds respect, and it enhances collaboration. In the same way, we see that God's covenant with Israel, and by extension what we're going to see is with us, is more about just following the commandments. It's about entering into a relationship with both parties are really committed, and they're all for the unity of these two people coming together. And this covenant reshaped, it changed all of Israel. When you think of Israel, and you think of the Old Testament, you think of the old law, you're thinking about this right here. It changes them because God didn't just rescue them from physical bondage. God calls them to be his people. And so let me kind of highlight what is their promise? What are they promising to do? Their promise is that they're obeying God's voice and keeping God's covenant. By obeying God's commands, the Israelites wouldn't just, start this new thing, but they were going to secure this crazy place that no other people group in the course of history has ever experienced. This kind of status of God's people provided for. This is a high level thing. And that's where it brings you to Exodus 19 and Exodus 20. We see the 10 Commandments. But again, if you've been in church for a while, you know what these things are. And maybe you saw some of the old animated videos of this crazy Moses with this crazy hair blowing and God's finger just popping up right in these. But the 10 Commandments are these. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. That's a good one. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, and you shall not covet. So what's crazy about this, and that a lot of people just kind of get this view wrong of the Ten Commandments as you're thinking about the Old Covenant and the Mosaic Covenant. Because the law wasn't cruel. It's not God saying, hey, now you got to follow these rules to be in my good grace. No, like the law was grace. The law was so refreshing to them. They didn't have the Bible, and in a real sense, they didn't know fully what was right, what was wrong, like God's expectations on them. Like, can you imagine, like being like, I'm trying my best, but I have no idea like what direction to go. And I know you guys, y'all love a to-do list, right? Who doesn't love a good to-do list? And God says, hey, like you want to like thrive, do this. Like they were wandering around in the wilderness having no idea what to do, and God says, hey, like this is grace to you. Here's a set of rules to live your life by. These are going to really help you out. And it's not just a list of rules. Here's what it really is. It's really a marker of a people set apart. So God, they promised this. What does God promise? God's promise, be God's treasured possession and be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Deuteronomy 7:9 just kind of puts the exclamation point on what kind of God we serve. It says, know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. That's the kind of God we serve. We serve a God who's a promise maker and a promise keeper. He keeps his promises every single time. And so he's saying, hey, you do that, I'm going to do this. And God's covenant promise is really, it's an invitation of intimacy. Like, hey, come here. I want to have a relationship with you guys that's unlike anything that any people have ever seen before. I mean, communion with the creator of the universe. And I want you to think about this, like if I brought you up here and gave you a mic and say, hey, who are you closest to? Like just call out their name, right? I don't know if it'd be a best friend, maybe a family member, maybe a coworker, maybe like a pledge brother in college. I don't know who it would be for you. But my next question to you would, what sets them apart? Like, if you're so close to them, what sets them apart in your life? And I bet, if I'm going out on a limb, it's a shared commitment. It's a mutual trust. It's a bond that's thicker than blood. You know, whatever it is, it's something that brings two people together, and it's just in a deep way. In the same way, our covenant relationship with God, it thrives on mutual loyalty and obedience. And this covenantal relationship established by Israel as a nation set apart is really like God saying, hey, you're going to be a beacon to the world, a light on a hill, declaring everybody who I am. Like, you're going to be my representation to the entire world. And maybe this imagery of kingdom of priests, maybe that's new to you, but it highlights a really, really deep theological truth is the universal priesthood of believers, where every individual is called to represent God's love and his grace to basically everybody in your sphere of influence. I want you to raise your hand actually right now. We're going to do a little participation. I want you to raise your hand if you are called to ministry. Raise your hand. Okay, some of y'all are picking up on it. It's a little bit of a trick question because if you're a believer in the room, you are called to ministry. Now, not necessarily vocationally, not necessarily, does that mean that needs to be your full-time job? No, I mean like if you are a believer, you are called to ministry. To every area of your life, like it needs to overflow out of you in ministry, and the same thing that you expect it to be. And I want you to look to 1 Peter 2:9, and you're going to see some similar language that we see God talking about here in Israel to what we can know now is us, not written to Israel. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And some of us in the room need to realize that that's us. If we're a believer, like that's said of us. That's not said of Israel. That's not said of people thousands of years ago. It sounds similar because it is similar. But we get to enter into this kind of relationship where this becomes us. This becomes our identity. And we really need to get this. Like social, we really need to get this. And I've seen this a lot in my life. I've seen this a lot with family members and friends, and even I've fallen into this in the past. Is you think that you walked an aisle when you're 6 years old or 10 years old, and you prayed a prayer, and you got your get out of hell free card, and now you're just chilling. You're just chilling. I'm a Christian. I'm all good. I even go to the social sometimes. I go to a small group. And what I'm not saying is you're not saved. But what I'm saying is if you got saved at 7 years old and you're not really living on mission for the Lord, you're missing out on one of the greatest promises that God could have for you, is that God wants to use you. And God can use you, and he wants to use you. So his promise is very similar to you, is he wants to use you. And you need to be a people set apart for God's glory. It's kind of like, I don't know how many of you were like the sixth man on the bench, on basketball team, or you were the B team, but you never got in, growing up in sports. But it's kind of like being on a team, and you never play, you never catch a pass, never run a lap, never really do anything, but your team wins the championship and you get the ring. You got the ring. But did you really get to enjoy what it was? Did you really get to be used? God's calling some of you to get off the sidelines and get in the game and become an agent of the kingdom. That's what he's called every believer to. And so once we grasp the significance of our divine calling and identity, we need to be inspired to live a life like that, right? So then number 4, we see the sign. And the sign is honoring the Sabbath. The Sabbath, we've talked about that a bunch here at the social. We talked about rest. And the Sabbath comes from this Hebrew word sabbat, and it directly translates into rest. And with this covenant, here's what's basically happening is God saying, hey, you need to set aside a day to reflect, to rest, and not do any activity, and just think about our relationship. Exodus 31:13, he emphasizes this, saying, you were to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. The Sabbath it's a symbol of trust. It's a symbol of trust. It's a symbol of trusting in God's providence. Think of the Sabbath as not like an obligation and a contract, but as, again, a divine invitation to trust in God. And I know this to be true. If we left here, we all go out to our cars in the parking lot. I tell you each to turn on your car and me to look at your dashboard. I know some of you have been holding off on going to the shop, and some of you got some lights blinking. Some of you need to be doing some stuff, like maybe tomorrow morning go to Walmart and have them give you a whole tune-up, because some of y'all go way too long without oil change. Just that's a freebie tonight. But in the same way of ignoring some flashing lights on your dashboard, if you're ignoring the Sabbath, if you're ignoring this covenant, if they're ignoring the Sabbath, they're going to be missing out on some huge things and going to be walking into some unforeseen consequences. And here's what we need to understand tonight, even about the Sabbath and looking back, is so many of these 10 commandments. If you do every 10 commandment, you keep the Sabbath holy, it's going to be great for your life. God gave these as a gift to us. And actually we can see this, God's commandments are good for us. And Jesus emphasized this in Mark 2:27. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So this is just a gift to be able to reflect on who God is and what this means in our life. So we see the sign, and then let's look at the penalty here. This is where it gets real. And the penalty is risk of disconnection. It's the sobering reality of the removal of God's presence, the removal of his protection. And this is what I know to be true, is sometimes it takes losing something to know how much it means to you, right? Have you ever been there? And I promise you this, is that Israel has seen crazy things happen. From the plagues and being protected to the Red Sea parting. These are people who've seen God's protection like almost nobody in the course of history has seen things, like crazy. God just loving you just because where you were born, right? Crazy. And the removal, can you think about how painful that removal would be? I know in my own life, I've had moments that have been mountaintop experiences, if you will, and I felt so close to the Lord, and I feel like every step, every moment he's leading me, I feel like every single minute of the day I'm just overwhelmed by his presence. And then I've had seasons that just feel dry. And it's a terrible feeling. And I've been in those moments where I'm like, man, I just so much want to go back because I've tasted God's goodness, his closeness. I need that in my life, and I need to be drawn there. And I'm not saying if you just go 2 days without reading your Bible, God's going to abandon you forever. But what I'm saying is, if you lose the intimacy with God, it hurts. And it changes things. And that's not what God wants. God wants you to be leaned in and have an intimate communication and communion with him. So we see the problem, we see the plan, we see the promise, we see the sign, and we see the penalty. And really what we can kind of walk away with is that the Mosaic Covenant is more than just an ancient set of laws. We've glimpsed into the heart of God who yearns, who longs, who wants a deep and intimate relationship with, yes, you. That's what he wants. It's marked by his unwavering love, his boundless grace, a shared commitment to walk hand in hand with them. And so really, I want to almost like pause right here and just say, like, do you have that kind of relationship with God? Like a moment of self-reflection in the room, like, do you have that kind of relationship with God? Only you can answer that. You feel close, intimate, near, or distant? Let's think about people in your life that you really care about. Let's say that you are in that great place. Family, friends, coworkers, people on your aisle, people you drove past getting here in Rogers that you don't even know. Like, do we have a heart for those people to have that same level of connection with God? Because at the end of the day, it's all that matters. There's nothing else that matters but your relationship to God. You know, it's Passion Week. We got Good Friday this Friday, Easter this Sunday. It's a powerful time to reflect on a lot of things, but definitely to think about Christ's death and resurrection. And if I'm being honest, I'm coming into this year different than I ever have been. 3 weeks ago, I lost my father. He passed away. He was on a mission trip, medical mission trip in the Philippines. And so he was in the Philippines doing what he loved, which was medical missions. And he was there, and as soon as he got there, he had trouble breathing. He went to the hospital, and they quickly diagnosed him with like the fastest acting leukemia. And within 10 days, he went from being totally normal, dad, I could just pick up the phone, to going to heaven. And it's in this time it rattles you because you get to see face to face of how quick life can be. We just had his funeral this past Friday, actually, and before the funeral, I was sitting there talking with my mom about just how crazy fast it was. And it's like, man, one day they're here, the next day you're not, and you just want to pick up the phone and call him, and he's not there anymore. And in the middle of just wrestling with this grief, and be very honest, like the worst loss I've ever experienced in my life. And I know many of you have experienced loss to that level before, and you've been there and you've experienced that. But here's what I want to say to you. Is as we're looking at grief, as we're looking at death, nobody in here is promised tomorrow. Your loved ones aren't promised tomorrow. You're not promised to have one more conversation. So like, if you're sitting there waiting to have a conversation with somebody, don't wait. If you're sitting there and you're like, hey, I think I'm going to get right with God just later. Like right now I'm kind of going through some stuff. I'm busy. Don't wait. What a beautiful time to look to the cross. Passion Week. We get to look to Friday where he gave his life for you and for me. And for everybody else in your life, everybody else in this world, everybody else in history, that Christ loved us enough to come and die for us. But he didn't stay dead. And here's where it all gets very real for me right now in my life as I'm walking this out with my family, just in the worst grief that I could ever imagine, is I get to have hope in heaven because what he did on Sunday. Because that the grave wasn't the end, because he rose again, it changes everything. And this goes all the way back to the covenant that we're looking at with Moses. It doesn't just start here. It doesn't just end here with Moses. Jesus is a fulfillment of it. He's the first fruits of this incredible covenant that God's saying, hey, I want to know you. He gives us these 10 commandments and he gives the people this. And I don't know about you, but you've got to be perfect. And I'm not perfect. So he sent his son, Jesus, to come and die for us, to live a perfect life, this covenant kind of life of like, he checked every box, only to die for sinners like me, for sinners like you. And again, he loved us so much that he did that to make a way so that you can have hope for eternity. And while it doesn't take away the pain of the loss, I'm telling you, if you've lost people in your life who are believers, you know this to be true, is it's different. It's actually weird. Because in one sense, you're grieving and you're heartbroken, but in another sense, you're rejoicing. Because death wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a glorious future in the presence of the Lord. And I'm telling you this, is you need that hope. And the Mosaic Covenant just puts a highlight, puts a stamp on it saying, you need to look past it. Look to Jesus. We need him so much, and you need this hope in your own life. And so tonight, in the midst of what I've been walking through, it just is a reminder. In the midst of what we're going through this week, looking to Easter, it's a reminder. As your friend, as your pastor, I want to remind you, if you don't have that kind of hope, if you don't have that kind of peace, if you don't have that kind of commitment, that covenant relationship with God where you said, hey, in the best way I know how, I'm turning from my sin and placing my faith and trust in you. If you've never had that kind of moment of surrender, you don't need to wait another second longer. I'm going to pray here in just a minute, and we're going to have people in the back, our prayer team, and I would love to talk with you. And just a great week to say, hey, I'm giving my life to Christ this week, today. And we're going to have some time. We're going to have 2 more songs, and you can take all the time you need to go back in the back to tell somebody, hey, like tonight, I need to do that. I need to get right with the Lord. I want to change my life. I want to give my life into God's hands tonight. We'll have a team back there. But maybe some of you fall in that category that you just kind of check the boxes. You haven't been living on mission for God. And tonight you need to say, all right, God, I'm coming back to that. I need to be devoted to you. I need to use my life. Lord, use me. We're going to have this altar open, and I just challenge you, nobody's looking around, nobody's judging you. Just do whatever you need to do tonight to get right with the Lord. And then I'm going to make a big challenge to us tonight. And again, there's nothing special, nothing crazy about this place up here, just a physical representation of just bringing it to the Lord. I'm going to ask you, if you have someone in your heart and your mind that doesn't know Jesus, that if they died, it's a very different kind of conversation because you don't have the hope that we have, that my family has been walking with. I just invite you to come up here and just bring their name before God. And then even ask him, God, give me the boldness, give me the words, give me the favor to even invite them to church. Or just tell them the gospel yourself tomorrow at work, whatever it is. I'm just going to challenge us as I pray. After I pray, let's get up and let's move and let's do work with the Lord. Can we do that together? Jesus, thank you for the hope of heaven that we get to enjoy. That God, in the middle of grief, in the middle of loss, in the middle of our mess, Lord, we know. God, we thank you for your goodness, your faithfulness to us. God, while we were still sinners, you died for us. And you made a way for us. God, thank you that you are a promise keeper. God, what a beautiful picture, just how we can see your work through the whole Bible. Lord, looking at Noah, looking at Abraham, looking at Moses, looking to the weeks ahead, God, we see how you are longing for a relationship with us. God, would you remind us that that's all that matters? If we have nothing else but you, Lord, that's enough. And God, would that be the heart cry? And then, God, we just pray that you will just set our hearts ablaze, Lord, that we'll take into account of how short we have on this earth. And God, we will be motivated, burdened for the lost. Lord, would Northwest Arkansas look different? Would this community look different because of one person in this room tonight who says, Lord, I'm all in for you. So God, would you move in power? Thank you for your goodness and your presence. In your name I pray, amen.